forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up, I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes this day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? These battle scars are impressions of everything that it is.
Scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Now, if I had a voice that reached 100 million people, I'd tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Well, hello everyone. How are you doing? And which camera is this on? Okay. As you can tell, we're gonna get ready to do some we're gonna do some ranked choice in this house, and you all know how excited I get about that. I want to get a little bit closer up. But before we do, oh, and hi. I just kind of jumped right into it because I was getting all excited. Hello. How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Oh, where did I put my overlay screen? Because I do need to do all my promos, but let me set this show up so you know what's going to go on and in what order. And perhaps at some point I'll add in timestamps. But first, we're going to go through some clips of a show that I happen to watch quite frequently. Oh, it says... Sorry, I didn't have my mic up in front of me. That should be better. Thank you, Trendlin. I was so... If you could see... I've got all my little ranked choice, little ballot things. I was scrambling to be ready. That's why the show is a few minutes late and I had my microphone away. So sorry about that. Hopefully the sound is better. Let me look at my levels. Yes, it's good. Okay, so there's a show that I watch regularly. I don't watch just politics. It's called Answers with Joe. I think his last name's Scarborough. It's very good. It's very science-y. So if you like science, you'll definitely enjoy Answers with Joe. He's got a very dry wit that I super appreciate. He very rarely gets political. And he claims in this show that he got political, but I really don't think he did. It was still science-y, based upon alternative voting systems, and I thoroughly enjoyed the show. Now, I know Joe thinks he avoids politics and saying a lot of his views, but if you watch his show enough, he's very much a lefty, but that's cool. I don't care. One way or another, I watch him for the science. But I know he thinks his politics doesn't come through. But I do recommend his show if you like really just cool layman science type shows. He isn't arrogant. He doesn't talk down to you. I'm sorry that the name of that black science popularizer. I can't think of his name right now. It was kind of like the successor to Carl Sagan, and I loved Carl Sagan. But for some reason, I can't think of this gentleman's name right now. I don't care for him. I always feel like I'm getting talked down to, but Joe Scarborough doesn't do that. So I'm highly recommending his show. So we're going to play. I extracted out a bunch of clips from his show, and I see that in chat it was said that, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name for the life of me. With blah, 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 you need more vowels. Can I buy a vowel? Neil deGrasse. That's right. Okay, I don't happen to care for Neil. His style just doesn't appeal to me. It does appeal to some people. More power to you. Don't come for me. People like Joe's style appeals to me. So we're going to play those clips. And then afterwards, because he is going to end up advocating for alternative voting system and does spend quite a bit of time on RCV, we are going to do a live demo of RCV, which I've done before. I did a live demo of RCV voting on a real ballot. I like using an example of a real ballot rather than some fictional, rank whether you like chocolate chip cookies, peanut butter cookies, or fudge cookies. I like showing how RCV works in a real election with choices that you understand why people made. I don't think you can really understand it in these cute little fake ones. Okay? I did this in a demo before when after Joe Bishop Henchman had resigned from the LNC last term, and it was determined that the LNC needed to elect a new chair. That's wrong. Pursuant to our bylaws. Sorry, not sorry if you disagree with me. You're just parliamentarily wrong on this point. Ken Molman was chair. But whatever, the LNC overruled that ruling of the legitimate chair, Ken Molman, and they had an election for a new chair, and they used RCV. And Whitney was elected at that election. And a lot of people thought there was cheating going on because they just didn't understand RCV. And even though I ranked Whitney last, she wasn't my choice. It was not a rigged election. There was no cheating. Whitney actually was the consensus candidate of that voting body. We're going to show this time a demonstration of a selection between 6 potential LNC locations. I'm going to give you the spoiler right up front. New Mexico won, and this time it was a selection I wanted to win. But I want to show how New Mexico really was the consensus location. So it took 5 rounds to get there. So this is going to be fun. We're going to do that at the end. I'll show you how we got to New Mexico, round by round. I was worried this was going to be a 1 or 2 rounder and it wouldn't be fun for a demo, but it was 5 rounds, which was, I think, what Whitney's election was too. Now, what got weird with Whitney's election, however much I love Ken Molman, he is just wrong about NOTA, and he gave wrong instructions on NOTA that kind of screwed up that whole thing. Whitney would have won anyway. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say his bad instructions on NOTA, because if he had given correct instructions, people would have voted differently. So this has nothing to do with that. Her election on the LNC, as far as the process went, was fair and square, and it just should never have happened because Ken was the party chair. I've been over this before. I'll explain NOTA, Trendelin, when we get to the point where we're going to do the demo, and I'll explain more on how I think Ken messed that up. But first, as an intro, we're going to go through some clips from Answers with Joe. But before we get started with that, look, I'm a real YouTuber, Ma. Look at this. Please subscribe, like, and share. I never ask you to subscribe. My subscriber my subscriber count has been stagnant because I never ever ask you to subscribe. So please do. Please give it a like and a share if in fact you do like it. I honestly don't care if you give it a dislike. It's engagement. Do one or the other. Hit the thumbs up or thumbs down. I mean, obviously I want to create content people like, but YouTube rewards you for engagement. So whatever. Dislike it if you don't like it. And look here. You can follow me on my social medias. I'm Karen Ann Harlos on everything. I actually joined Truth Social just to like get a little trolly, and I'm Karen Ann Harlos there too, but I'm hardly ever there because my God, is that place boring. It's more boring than MeWe, and I didn't think that was possible. And lastly, please, if you like this type of content, this in-depth, LP-specific, third-party, inside baseball stuff, I desperately need your support on Patreon. It's been a rough year for content creators. So I'm setting my December goal now. I really need to raise about $75 a month in subscribers. I sincerely do. And in order to keep things going for the amount of time I have to invest in this that takes away from other jobs. So, Nathan, you've gotten banned at Truth. I've tried to get banned at, not banned, but Truth Jail. I can't. I even posted, no lie, I should have put a copy of this. I actually asked on Truth when the waifu edition of My Pillow was coming out. I thought for sure that would get me put in timeout, but it didn't. And it's a legitimate question. When is the waifu My Pillow coming out? Bet you didn't think of that. And now that's going to be all you can think of when you see those commercials. Come on, Mike Lindell. The market needs to provide. Okay, so now let's get on to the clips from Answers with Joe. And the way it works is I clipped out multiple segments. We're going to let him talk. I'm going to comment. We're going to let him talk. I'm going to comment. But I see a couple comments here that I want to address. RCB, I'm a huge fan of RCB. I see Sarah thinks it's the worst voting system ever. Respectfully disagree. It doesn't take forever when you use a computer like modern people should, but I like reproducing it by hand so that people understand it. But when you use a computer, it's instantaneous and you get majority consensus instantaneously. Rather than having, like, if Georgia had RCB, we would not be having a runoff election and wasting millions of dollars on a runoff election. There would have been instant runoff. Now, I'm going to explain these terms because Joe's going to use them when it comes up during his commentary. Okay, so let's get going. Unfortunately, the comments will not be on the screen because the clip from Answers with Joe will fill the screen.
The election system in the United States is the original iPhone of election systems. Although, to be fair, it has evolved a little bit over the years, so maybe it's closer to, I don't know, an iPhone 6 at this point. Also, in the interest of accuracy, the United States doesn't have one election system. It's actually a patchwork of election systems because every state kind of has their own take on it, but that's my metaphor and I'm sticking to it. The way the US runs elections made perfect sense 230 years ago when it was first created. But of course, the world has changed a lot since then. A lot of these newer democracies that have come up since then were able to kind of jump in with newer, better systems that just make a lot more sense today. Which is why, as much as we love to call ourselves the freest and most democratic country in the world, many international freedom watchdogs don't have us at the top of the list. In fact, we're nowhere near the top. We can start with Freedom House, which doesn't have rankings per se, just lists countries as free, partly free, and not free. Gotta love the simplicity. Well, they have the US listed as free, which is a good start, and they give us a grade of 83 out of 100. Not great, not terrible. Then you've got the Democracy Index from the Economist Intelligence Unit.
Okay, I am going to stop here 1 second, and I don't like that I'm up in his face. So, I want to stop here for a second because I'm going to take a little bit of a different take than Joe. You notice that he is conflating freedom with democracy. And I think so are these, well, maybe not. I don't know what the Freedom Index criteria is. But these democracy indexes are really talking about voting and voting systems and participation in decisions. The freedom index, I have a feeling, is measuring entirely different things. So I think we should just throw that portion of the show out and let's deal with...
Objection, speculative.
There you go, Nathan. Let's deal with the democracy index thing. And it is the more democratic, allegedly, a system doesn't necessarily make it more free. No, it doesn't. In theory, obviously this doesn't work out in practice very often. It never has. But in theory, you can be the freest you ever were under a dictator. A dictator who just gets up and says, I dictate, do what you want as long as you aren't harming other people. Now that would be very, very free, but you're under a dictator. Just because people voted doesn't mean that you're free. I don't think looking at a democracy index really has that much correlation with freedom. But here is the reality. We do have voting, and we are making decisions this way. So this is an interesting thought exercise, but I just want to get it right on the table up front that I don't think democracy equals freedom. However, out of all of the systems that have existed before, I think as of right now, it probably is the system that has the most potential for the most freedom. And I know not all libertarians will agree with me. Now, I'm not a fan of democracy, but I'm also a lesser fan than the other systems, on average, on whole. Oh, my furnace has come on. Give me a second. Whoops. Had to turn that off. That's super loud. Sorry about that. But on average, out of the systems that exist today, the one that's going to at least give you a chance at getting some freedom, at least having some voice in doing that, probably is some form of a democratic system, even though I'm not a fan of democracy. It's the least of the evils that are before us right now, if, that's what we're comparing. Nathan, I consider a republic a form of democracy. It's a more distributed form of democracy, but it's a form of democracy. Anything where you're making decisions that is based upon a vote, that's it's not a pure democracy, but it's a democratic type of system. And the democracy index, at least in their definitions, I'm not saying they're formal definitions because I haven't gone to their website, but I'll prove my assertion later when he starts talking about the systems, obviously agrees with me because none of the countries that rate high are pure democracies. So obviously the democracy index is not talking about a pure democracy. I think a pure democracy is absolutely terrible, but none of these systems that we're going to be talking about today are pure democracies. They are all variations of it. A pure democracy would be that the 51 rule over the 49, just by sheer numbers straight across the board. Every system that rates high on this alleged democracy index, none of them are pure democracies. And we'll get into that. I just wanted to, though, get right off the bat here my libertarian take, which is different from Lefty Joe, because he is a lefty, even though he's so adorable. I love his show, as I've said before. I do not equate democracy and freedom, and I don't think democracy is a goal in and of itself. I do think freedom is.
They've actually been keeping track of democracy trends since 1946. They rank countries in 4 categories: full democracy, flawed democracy, hybrid regime, and authoritarian. They rank the US at 26th in the world. In fact, we don't even make the top category. We come in as a flawed democracy. One more I'll point out is the democracy matrix from the German Research Foundation. They rank countries as working democracies, deficient democracies, hybrid regime, moderate autocracy, and hard autocracy. And yeah, again, we don't crack the top category in this one. We come in as a deficient democracy.
Okay. So I said everything I really want to about this clip, so we're going to go right on to the next one.
But the argument has been made, and I find it pretty compelling
do
myself,
a
that
Joe.
at the heart of all these issues is the voting system itself, the way we count the votes. That's right, kids. We're going to talk about first past the post voting. First past the post is basically winner take all. In other words, you get one vote for
I'm
one
just going to stop. Oh my God, he is so adorable. Okay, I'm going to continue.
candidate, and whoever candidate gets the most votes wins. Which, I mean, it sounds like it makes sense. I mean, that's democracy, right? And yeah, it does make sense in a strictly two-party system. Because if you only have two people running, then whoever wins will by definition get more than 50% of the vote. But add one person to it, whether it's a third party or if you're voting for multiple people in like a primary, say, things start to not work so well.
And we discovered this in Georgia. Now, kudos to Georgia to require a majority vote. But unless you're dealing with a wildly unbalanced between the two major parties, they're going to be close. And all it takes is one third party person who gets any significant amount, and by significant I mean over 0.5% of the vote, to throw things off. And we saw that happen in Georgia. And kudos to Chase Oliver for that. But he got about 2%, or was it just over 2%? And he prevented either of the old party candidates from either of them getting a majority. A majority is required to elect in Georgia. And again, kudos to Georgia for requiring a majority to elect. Not kudos to Georgia for not having instant runoff voting, because they're just wasting a shit ton of money. But yeah, this video came out way before what happened in Georgia, but this is a good example of it. Our voting system is designed to produce only a two-party system. Therefore, the two parties have a vested interest in maintaining it, unless one of them is consistently less popular than the other. Which is why in blue states, generally, a lot of Republicans will support an alternative voting system, and in red states, it's vice versa. But when you're in a purple, no, neither of them do. Because they have a vested interest. The voting system we have in place right now is specifically designed to have the shitty system that we have right now. It's specifically designed for this, and he's going to get into this. Clip 3.
Because if that third person gets any significant number of votes, you end up with somebody winning the election without getting 50% of the vote. In other words, they win a plurality but not a majority. So you could wind up with a representative that 60% of people voted against.
Let's stop here for 1 second. So he did a good definition of terms. He's not going to define some things later, which I'm really surprised at, because Joe is usually very thorough. But he slips up a couple spots here. But majority vote means more than 50%. It doesn't mean 50% plus one. Please don't ever say that. You just make every parliamentarian in the world get Forrest Whitaker eye when you say that. It means more than 50%. But a plurality just means the most votes. So if you have, 3 candidates in a plurality election, no one gets a majority, which means that whoever gets elected is likely, well, inevitably not the choice, though we don't know if they would be their second place choice, of the majority, rather than being the choice of the majority. So another thing, though, parliamentary-wise, please do not use the words simple majority. What does that mean? What does it mean? Where's my make it make sense?
Make it make sense.
Make it make sense, because that's what, if you just mean more than 50%, that's just majority. Adding the word simple to it adds nothing to it. In fact, it adds confusion. And there's people that argue that simple majority means plurality. So please stop doing that in your bylaws. For the love of Zeus, please stop.
And the more candidates in the race, the smaller the percentage the winner would actually get, and the less democratic the whole thing becomes. This sounds like a little thing, but it's not. Some pretty bad results happen over time.
Okay, next one. I shouldn't stop mid-video. I should wait till... I just can't help it, though. When there's something I want to say, I gotta say it.
For example, there's a spoiler effect. Let's say you start a third party because you just don't feel like either of the traditional parties really represent you. Perfectly valid, makes sense. Well, in a first-past-the-post system, you are basically ensuring that you're going to siphon votes away from the party that you most align with, and basically hand...
Okay, I'm gonna stop. Because I hate that terminology. It's quite obvious that while Joe is sympathetic to third parties, he isn't enmeshed in the culture of third parties to know that this type of terminology is just extremely offensive. Not that I think anybody should really care, like, big deal, you offended somebody. But it's also inaccurate and entitled. And it betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of a lot of third-party voters. A lot of third-party voters wouldn't vote at all. So they aren't, quote-unquote, siphoning votes away from anybody. And a lot of the third-party voters who wouldn't vote at all are because they just don't really believe in voting and are only voting third party because they're most like libertarians, a lot of radical libertarians who are doing it to ultimately dismantle the system, and I would fall into that category. But for libertarian candidates, I wouldn't vote at all. But others who would be inclined to vote, they wouldn't vote for either of the other two anyway because they hate them both and would rather just not vote. So this whole idea of siphoning away from the party you most agree with is just really damaging terminology. In some cases, that might be true. The last statistics I have, and I'm not going to be very specific here because I don't have the graphic in front of me, and it is quite dated. Things have changed, could have changed. I think this is from 2014, 2015, but it was, if there wasn't a libertarian in the race, it was something like 40% of the libertarian people, or between 35 and 40% would have voted for the Republican. About 28% would have voted for the Democrat, and the rest wouldn't have voted at all. So when you are already talking about a small fraction of the vote, say there's 100,000 libertarian votes, about 40,000 of them wouldn't have voted to begin with if there wasn't a libertarian. And then out of the remaining 60, it's about a 40-20 split. So the amount that really would have shifted more towards the Republicans it's pretty small. Most people don't understand that. He's going to make this assumption later on too, specifically about libertarians.
Election over to the guy from the party that you least align with. Perfect example, the year 2000. Ralph Nader ran as a strong Green Party candidate on a progressive platform, and he wound up pulling just enough votes away from Al Gore to swing the election to George W. Bush.
You don't know that. Possibly, but you don't know that the people who voted for, I've already went over this. Perhaps, perhaps not. But I do agree with him that this is a distinct possibility in a two-party system, which first past the post is set up to enshrine.
When Ross Perot ran as a conservative independent and basically handed the election to Bill Clinton. Perot got almost 20 million votes, which is super impressive for a third party in the United States, but he didn't win a single state, he got 0 electoral college votes, and Clinton won with only 43% of the popular vote.
But you don't know that those people would have voted the other way. You just don't know that. Clinton was pretty popular amongst centrists, too. I mean, when you look back on Clinton now, like, he seems just like downright middle of the road, doesn't he? With how radicalized, in a bad way, I often mean radical in a good way, but in this time I don't mean it in a good way, radicalized politics have become. And Nathan says Bush won by court rule anyway. Joe did mention that. I cut that part out because I really didn't want to get into the hanging Chad thing. I lived in Florida at the time of the hanging Chad, and as a Floridian at that time, we are just so proud of just screwing everything up. I still have the ballot from then I've saved in an envelope.
Voters in this system are constantly having to like vote strategically and play 4D chess and support the least bad candidate instead of actually voting for the cause or the person that they believe in. It's like every time you step into the ballot box, you've got to like hold your nose and vote for somebody that you don't particularly like just because you don't want to let the other guy win, you know. Or as South Park pointed out, it's always a choice between a turd sandwich and a giant douche.
And our system is specifically designed for that.
Now, to go even further in our winner-take-all system, whoever has control of the House or the Senate, even if it's just by one seat, they get to control all the committees. So there's no incentive to work together. Candidates have no incentive to move to the middle because they'll always get primaried from the political extremes, all of which just moves the parties further and further apart, leading to the polarization we see today. There's a lot of other reasons why we're polarized today, but the way we count the votes is definitely part of that reason.
I agree. And that does not come up nearly enough. And in all of our discussions about voter suppression, there's two things that never come up. The way we vote, not do we open the polls on Saturday, which was the issue du jour in Georgia, but fundamentally how we vote and fundamentally how people can get on the ballot. That's the true voter suppression in this country.
This is not a left or right issue, it's a systems issue. So let's take a look at some different, arguably better, ways of doing this. So there's essentially three types of voting systems: plurality majority, proportional representation, and mixed systems. And every country has their own variations of these different systems. There's no way to cover all of them, but here's a few kind of high-level examples.
Okay. He does the type of editing, as you know, where he moves all around the screen, so I can't even put my face in one spot in order not to cover his. We're not going to go over mixed systems, but we are going to go over examples that he gives of plurality majority and proportional representation. Spoiler, while my immediate push is just for RCV in the system we have now, I'm a huge believer in proportional representation, and we'll get into that.
Okay, so under the plurality majority category, you have first past the post, which we just talked about. Then there's the two-round system, block voting, and party block voting. So I was talking a second ago about how the first past the post system, you can get people who win the election without winning a majority. Well, the two-round system is a way to prevent somebody from winning the election without getting a majority. It's basically a runoff system. So
that's what Georgia has, by the way.
You have your first round of elections, and if nobody gets more than 50% of the vote, you take the top two people, do a second vote, and whoever gets that wins. And that way you actually get somebody who wins more than 50% of the vote.
And you could do that instantaneously with ranked choice.
Block voting has voters use as many votes as there are seats to fill their district, and they're often free to vote for candidates regardless of their party affiliation. I should point out this is especially more useful in systems where there are multiple representatives per district. There are some places that have more than one representative per district, so you can have representatives from different parties. And one advantage of this system is that it helps retain a voter's ability to vote for individual candidates while increasing the role of parties at the same time.
Okay, we're not going to get into that. I just kept it there as a curiosity. Well, we might slightly get into that when we get into proportional representation.
Party block voting is kind of like block voting, but you vote for a party and not for an individual candidate. The actual people who represent your district would be voted on by the party itself. This is a simple to use system, but it suffers from some of the same disadvantages found in first past the post.
And again, we're not really going to get into that. I certainly don't advocate for that.
Okay, so those are all examples of majority plurality systems. The next system of voting is called proportional representation, often just shortened to PR. This basically takes the percentage of the total votes that a political party receives and then assigns that percentage of seats to that party in the legislature. So let's say you have a legislature with 100 seats for easy math, and the orange party gets 40% of the vote, the green party gets 30%, the red party gets 20%, and the blue party gets 10%. Those parties will be given 40, 30, 20, and 10 seats respectively. This way, the overall proportion of interest in the people is reflected in the representation. Now, the advantage of the PR system is that it more accurately reflects how a population has voted. Plus, there's few wasted votes. It also encourages the development of multiple parties, and it incentivizes these parties to work together to form coalitions, instead of, say, you know, calling your opponent a blood-sucking, child-molesting Satan worshiper.
And that's where a bit of his leftism come out. What about just calling your opponent a bigoted Nazi homophobe? We all know how polarized our systems is, but I am huge fan of proportional representation if we're going to have a government.
But no talk of different voting systems is complete without
Yay!
talking about ranked choice voting, also known as single transferable vote, an alternative vote, an instant runoff voting. Multiple names are fun.
Okay, this is where he dropped the ball. He acts like they are all multiple names for the same thing. I am surprised he didn't research this more and he has that like kind of smuggish look on his face there, but it's still adorable. Let me explain this to people because it's not confusing. Ranked choice voting is an umbrella term. It's like dog is an umbrella term. Then under the umbrella term of dog, you have poodles, you've got German shepherds, which are very specific things. They're not the same thing. A German shepherd isn't the exact same thing as all dogs. So ranked choice is an umbrella term. But he tries to claim, oh, and you've got other terms such as instant runoff voting, single transferable vote. Instant runoff voting and single transferable vote are not the same thing. They are not equivalent names. They are both under the umbrella of ranked choice voting, like both German shepherds and poodles are under the umbrella of dogs, but they are not the same thing. So let me give you the simple, easy way to remember this. It's not difficult. STV is used in multi-winner races. So say if you have a town council where you're voting for 5 at-large members. So a single transferable vote is when you have more than one winner. Instant runoff voting, IRV, so you have STV, single transferable vote, or instant runoff, IRV, is when there's one winner. That's it. There's different ways of calculating it. STV is designed for multi-winner races in order to give proportional representation. So, they're not all the same thing. Joe got very sloppy here, which is unlike him. And Ruben asked in chat, I know I don't have it on the screen right now, if I'm a Coloradan now. I've been a Coloradan since 2014. No, earlier than that. I joined the LP in 2014. I was already here for about a year and a half. So 2012. And Ruben's a Floridian now. All right. But anyway, it probably wasn't that important to Joe's overall point, but that's not like him. Normally he would say something like, these aren't really all terms for the same thing, but for right now, we're just going to use the term ranked choice voting. And that would have been fine. But he acted like they were all equivalent terms, and he got all smiling like, multiple names is fun. No, they're different names for different things.
I'll stick with ranked choice voting for the purposes of this video, because with ranked choice voting, you, wait for it, rank your choices.
You do that in all of them. But okay, I just wish he had pointed that out, particularly since, because he kind of did what I said he should have. I forgot he said that. So he kind of redeemed himself, but he still did give the impression that like these terms are all interchangeable when they're not. Instant runoff voting, remember, is for single winners. STV, single transferable vote, which I need to do a demo of single transferable vote, which I've never done. That's a lot more complicated. That's for multi-winner races and what sets you up for proportional representation. Though you can do proportional representation even in multiple single winner races, but STV can give you in like a race where you have a bunch of at-larges proportional representation right away.
So instead of casting just one vote for one candidate, you actually rank the candidates based on your preference. For example, if you're a libertarian and feel like Republicans have gotten a little too brown shirty.
Okay, notice how he just assumed that libertarians would have opinions on Republicans. You're letting your biases show. This is another place you got very sloppy, Joe. Plenty of libertarians come from the left, and if there weren't a libertarian candidate, would vote for a Democrat. So don't act like libertarians are only looking at Republicans. Again, that was sloppy of you, Joe.
Your taste, you can actually vote Libertarian as your first choice, and then Republican as your second choice, and then just go down the line. Then if your top choice doesn't get a majority, your vote would just go down to your second choice. And if that one doesn't get a majority, it'll go down to your third choice, and so on. In this system, you can actually...
We will get into this in another show, Nathan, but Star is not a version of ranked choice voting. It does use ranking, but ranked choice voting is a specific type of voting. Star is different. It's closer, from what I understand, to range voting. Beyond the scope of this video, I'm not as knowledgeable about Star as I am about RCV. But Star does not fall under the RCV umbrella, even though ranking is used just in political, technical terms. It's not a form of RCV.
Vote what you believe in. And you know you're not going to throw your vote away, or that you're actually going to lean the table toward the party you
And
least...
someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but that is to the best of my knowledge. I do not claim to be any kind of expert in Star whatsoever.
agree with. So all that sounds great, but could it ever happen here in the United States? Really?
Okay, I share his skepticism. However, ranked choice voting is getting huge strides in Colorado. When I can, which isn't very often, so I'm not trying to do any stolen valor here, I try to assist with RCV Colorado. Most of my time spent with the LP, but for outside political work that I do, it is with RCV Colorado. We had a speaker from RCV Colorado who came and presented to the LNC, last LNC meeting. I had requested that. I'm a huge advocate for it, but you know, most of my time is spent on party stuff, but when it's not, I'm a huge advocate for RCV. And the way they did it in Colorado is they started working, rather than getting RCV implemented right away, their activism work focused on getting the infrastructure implemented. Because what happens is you could get your municipality to adopt RCV, but if your state or whoever is ultimately in charge of running the elections, it's different in each state, you know, it could be county-based, whatever, doesn't have the infrastructure in place, it is going to fail. And if, you know, depending upon what voting software they're using, we're not going to get into the whole Dominion controversy, but like Dominion has an RCV module, but you have to have the licensing for it. There's certain infrastructure you have to have in place first. So RCV Colorado did it very wisely over multi-year of getting the infrastructure in place so that when these individual municipalities now are starting to adopt RCV, they can transition into it smoothly. You are not going to succeed unless you make it as easy as possible on your county and city clerks. It's like when I was going to paralegal school, the best piece of advice I had nothing to do with the law. The best piece of advice I got from my professor was don't piss off the secretary. She will make your life hell. Same thing, when you're looking to change voting systems, do not piss off your county or city clerk. They will make your life hell. You need to try to make their life easy, to make the transition easy. There's a lot of resistance on the parts of elections officials for this, because they just see a nightmare. So you need to make it easy on them. Okay. Now, I said I was going to explain NOTA before we got into actually working with, I'm going to show you a live demo of a real RCV election. Okay, So, NOTA is none of the above. It's a libertarian fetish. I'm a big fan of it. I don't say that to be dismissive, but it's a libertarian fetish. I think it's in Arizona. It's also on the ballot. I do think NOTA should be on the ballot throughout the country. That's another thing I would definitely work for. But none of the above literally means none of the other candidates. That's what it means. None of the above makes no sense in ranked choice. You can't rank none of the above. Like, the two things are incompatible. The way you do functionally none of the above in ranked choice is you just rank the ones you'll tolerate and don't rank any furthers, and that's your expression of none of the above. And the only reason, Trendelin, there was controversy over this at the May convention is because Ken Molman has it entirely wrong. He treats NOTA like a candidate. NOTA is not a candidate. NOTA is a concept. It's the concept of I reject all of the other candidates or all of the candidates when you're dealing with a single winner race. You can't rank none of the above. None of the above can't... you'll understand more what I mean when I say this. It can't stay alive. If none of the above doesn't win right off the bat, it should be gone in subsequent rounds if you're using RCV. It makes absolutely no sense. Whitney's RCV election got all complicated in my explanation of it because Ken treated none of the above like a candidate, and he let people rank none of it. It doesn't work with RCV. That's really all I'm going to say upon it. I am certain that there'll be multiple debates about this in the future, but none of the above literally means I don't want any of these people. Once you hit none, never mind. Okay. I know there's arguments on both sides, but that's what happened there. None of the above was not an option in this particular ballot. And I know some libertarians will get upset and go, well, even if you don't rank it, it should always be an option. What happened? This isn't an election of people. This was a selection of a location. I don't think none of the above needs to be in libertarian. That's what NOTA means, Ruben. None of the above. It's just the acronym for it. I don't think in libertarian tradition that none of the above needs to be a selection in anything other than when you're electing people. Plus, this was part 2 of a question. The question that we were considering in Austin was when and where shall our next LNC meeting be? We only decided the first part in Austin, which was when, March 10th through 12th. So we already decided we are having a meeting and we are having it on such and such date. So not selecting a location isn't an option. So it made no sense to have none of the above here because people could have nominated any location that they wanted. We had an open thread for nominations. So it isn't as if these 6 options which are on the board were just shoved down everyone's throats, in which case then none of the above would make sense because we just start all over again with different locations. But we already decided we're having a meeting. The floor was thrown open. You could get bids from wherever you wanted. These are the 6, we got something like 14 bids. Then people were able to nominate out of those 14, and I'm sure the chair would have entertained if you had an actual bid from another location. Just like trying to explain why none of the above was an option, why NOTA was not an option on this particular ballot. So the original locations that were up for, that we had bids for, were Utah. Well, first let me do the 6 that ended up on the ballot. On the ranked choice ballot, I don't know if you could see them all. We had Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, New Mexico, and Rhode Island. We had like 4. It was either 4 to 6. There was multiple Colorado bids, but only one of them got nominated. And there were multiple, was it Georgia bids? There was a few that there were multiple bids for, but only one of the bids was nominated. So we ended up with this 6. Utah got eliminated. Salt Lake City is gorgeous. Don't know why nobody nominated Utah. It would have been fun to have a meeting there as well. But these are the 6 that got nominated. Now, if somebody had nominated multiple Colorado locations, I'm trying to get... See, well, you guys don't really need to see me. I guess I can come more over to this side. Yeah, that'll work. I'll have to move my mic over a little bit, though. So these are the 6. So what happened is the LNC was sent a ballot. We used a program called OpaVote, which is opavote.com. If you can use this for your local boards, it's free for small elections. This particular election for the LNC was free. You start having to pay for it when you have over a certain number of voters and a certain number of selections. But with 17 voters, which was the full LNC, because alternates are not full members, they're contingent members, whole other story, and 6 options, it was free to use OpaVote. So I highly recommend it because it'll do all these calculations for you instantaneously. I'll show you what an OpaVote screen looks like at the end here. And when the person opens their ballot, they saw the choices and they were randomized. So not everybody saw the choices in the same order. So it minimized the chances that people were ordering things in a certain way because that's the order in which they were presented on their screen. There is psychological benefit to being first on the ballot. You know, there's all kinds of science behind that. So OpaVote randomizes the way the choices appear to the voter. Then the way we set up this OpaVote is you picked one of your choices and you slid it over into slot 1. Then you took another one and split it over into slot 2, all the way up to 6. Now, you didn't have to rank all 6. So basically, you were ranking in order of your preference. For instance, I prefer to go, we're just going to use it in the order here, just for an example. I prefer to go to Alabama, but if on the first round, if Alabama isn't going to be the one that wins, then I would prefer Colorado. Then I would prefer Florida. Then I would prefer Georgia, and so on and so forth. You don't have to rank all 6. Like, say, for instance, I really wanted to go to Alabama, Colorado, and Florida in that order. But if I couldn't have either of those 3 choices out of the 3 remaining, I really don't give a shit. So you don't have to rank all 6 because you basically are saying, if my first 3 get eliminated, I really don't care. But if it goes past 3 rounds, you don't have a say then because you've basically said you don't care and your ballot is said to have been exhausted. So if a ballot goes more rounds than you ranked, you have exhausted your ballot. And we did have that happen to a few people in this particular election. I'm going to call it an election even though it wasn't for people. Brian Elliott abstained. So there were only 16 votes. So it took 9 to win. So the first out of these 6 to get 9 votes would win. If they got 9 votes on the first round, it's over. The rest of the ranking didn't matter. So now I'm going to actually show you how it works because to me, it's difficult to explain with words. Some people are really good at it. I'm not. It's easy to explain with a demonstration. So what I did, let me find a good example. Where's my ballot? So I do it with Post-its. So what I did is I've got a little sandwich here of my choices. So my first choice was New Mexico. So and I have my second choice. This is Carrie, this isn't me. I don't have my glasses on. Anyway, so this is Carrie. Her first choice was New Mexico. Oh, so how many with 16 voters? With 16 voters, 8, it still takes 9 votes. It still took 9 votes. Right? Or is my math off? You know, math isn't my strong point. It still takes 9 votes, though, with 16 voters. But anyway, so Carrie, her second choice was Colorado. And Colorado's, all of the Colorado ones here are pink. For obvious reasons. Her third choice was Alabama. Her fourth choice was Rhode Island. She didn't vote past 4. She only ranked up to 4 choices. Some people did that. Because I had to do this so quickly before the show, that's why the show was a few minutes late. I do have the actual ballots here. So if you want to see, I'm going to see if I can hold. I could probably put these up on the screen. But you can see there's all the locations and it's ranked in whatever order. So I do have the ballots here in case I don't understand what I did with my Post-its. I did print out all the ballots. So let's see how the first round went. And I want to pull up OPA vote in the background here. Just give me 1 second because I want to show you guys what their graphics look like as well. Okay, I have that up so I can show it to you guys. I advocated for New Mexico because we just reaffiliated with New Mexico. And the last time we were in New Mexico, and JJ will see why this date is significant, the last time we were in New Mexico was November of 1972. Why were we in New Mexico in November of 1972? Because we were affiliating New Mexico for the first time. So I thought it would be really cool symbolism if we went back to New Mexico when we had to reaffiliate them. So I was a huge and I wanted to encourage that affiliate. Plus, I know the National Association of Parliamentarians just had their convention in New Mexico, so New Mexico might be a potential convention site. I wanted to check it out. All right, so we're going to put everyone's first choice picks up on the board. So, Joseph Eklund, where's New Mexico? He picked New Mexico first. Dustin Blankenship, he picked Colorado first. Dustin Nana picked Rhode Island first. Mike Rufo picked Florida first. Pat Ford, big surprise, picked Rhode Island first. Rich Bowen picked Florida first. Stephen Nikit, whoa, I hate posties because they don't stick that well, and this happened to me last time. Let me just... Stephen Nikela picked Florida first. Looks like Florida's pulling ahead here for, doesn't it? Now, why do I have Florida in here twice? Okay, I messed up my color scheme here. Hold on. I'm just gonna, where'd my marker go? I knew I would do this because I was doing this so fast. Andrew, New Mexico was number 4. Okay. All right. So here's Andrew Watkins. Picked Florida first. Miguel, New Mexico. Karen Ann, me. New Mexico. I am losing half my ballots again. I hate Post-its for that, but I love it for that too. Dave Benner picked Georgia first. We're going to have these falling all over the place, I know. Joshua Smith picked Alabama first. Linnea Gabbard picked Alabama first. Todd Hagopian picked New Mexico. Carrie Eiler picked New Mexico. And Angela McArdle picked Colorado. If this was a plurality election, New Mexico had 5 votes more than anybody else. They would have won. So just interestingly, New Mexico did end up winning. But if this was a plurality election, New Mexico would have won. 5 to the next closest being Florida would be 4. But it requires 9 to win because 9 is the majority for 16 voters in a ranked choice. New Mexico obviously did not get 9 votes. It got 5 votes. So what you do is you eliminate your lowest, the one that had the least amount of votes, and you take that voter's second choice and move that vote up there. So I'll show you. So Georgia only had 1 vote. So sorry, Dave, your choice for Georgia is gone. But now you're still in the running, though, because you picked a second choice. And your vote gets transferred to there. So this was the first round. We're now on the second round. And Dave Benner's second choice was Alabama. And for some reason, he does not want to stick here. Which one was this? Dave, your Rhode Island does not want to stick. Okay, I think I got it to stick. All right, so now on this round, still nobody has... God, all my things keep falling down. These Post-its, I think, are getting cheaper and cheaper. So nobody has a majority yet. New Mexico still has 5. Florida has 4. Alabama has 3. Colorado has 2. Rhode Island has 2. The problem is, now what do we eliminate between Rhode Island and Colorado? What ranked choice does in that case is it randomly will pick between the two. So let me see in round 2, excuse me, round 3, because we're in round 2 right now. Which one it eliminated. It randomly picked Rhode Island to eliminate. So, let's go back. So, sorry, Rhode Island. So, Dustin Nana's first choice of Rhode Island gets eliminated. His second choice now counts. His second choice was Georgia. So, Georgia had already been eliminated. So then it moves to his third choice, which is Florida. Now, Florida and New Mexico are tied, but neither of them have 9 votes. Pat Ford only had Rhode Island. Since Rhode Island was eliminated, his ballot is now exhausted. But that doesn't change the number that is needed for a majority. It doesn't put the total voters down to 15. The total voters is still 16, even though he exhausted his ballot. All right, so now we're on this round, and we have New Mexico with 5, Florida with 5, Alabama with 3, Colorado with 2. That means Colorado is eliminated. So we take Angela, who had Colorado. We take her next choice, which was Georgia, which was already eliminated. Her next choice after that is Florida. So Florida's pulling in the lead here. We go to Dustin Blankenship. His choice for Colorado is eliminated. His next choice was New Mexico. So, Florida and New Mexico are now tied with 6 votes each, but neither of them have achieved a majority. So that only leaves Alabama left to be eliminated. So we're going to first take off Dave Benner's choice here. His choice after Alabama was New Mexico. We're going to take Linnea Gabbard. Her choice after Alabama was Florida. And Joshua Smith. His choice after Alabama was Georgia, which was already eliminated. His third choice was New Mexico. Somehow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, what? Did we win with 8? Am I missing one here? Oh, God. Figures that screwed this up somehow. But you can see how New Mexico got ahead. But let's look at what Opa Vote did, because I think something fell down, or I calculated one thing wrong in my thing here. So let's pull up what Opa Vote shows us. But you can see how everyone's next choices were allocated. And that's basically what I wanted to show you. Did I miss Pat Ford? No, Pat Ford got exhausted. That's correct. Hold on. But here is what Opa Vote shows. So here's round 1, just like I showed you, where New Mexico had 5, Florida had 4. Yeah, you're correct, Charles. Right. You are correct, because the exhausted vote. But we're going to go through each round now here with, because I think I said something incorrect earlier, because I think it does change what was required to elect. So here is, start again, New Mexico with 5, Florida with 4, and Atlanta, which got eliminated. So here's round 2. So it shows how Atlanta got eliminated, and the green was the second choice that got transferred over. No, this line here is what it took to, and yes, it did shift over to 8. Okay, I had that wrong. So it says threshold of 8, and then it went to threshold of 7.5, which is still 8. Okay, I get it. Okay. Why was it giving? No, it's a majority, not more than a majority. So 50%. So for ranked choice, you have to get 50%, not more than 50%. That's where I screwed up, because I'm thinking parliamentary wise. The threshold was 8, not 9. And if there was a tie at the end, it would have been settled through, randomization. All right. So here, you can see there was an exhausted vote, which moved the threshold down to 7.5, but it still functionally would be 8. And there's the exhausted ballot. Then Providence got eliminated, and its votes got moved up to Florida. And then you could see that round where New Mexico and Florida were tied with 6 votes each. Then round 5, you have Albuquerque, who got ahead by 1 vote. So the winner is Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now it gives you some rules up here at the top. Alrighty, I wanted to show you something else cool with Opa Vote. And Opa Vote, Nathan, doesn't cost anything if the number of voters and the number of selections is low enough. So this election was free. I don't know what the threshold is. Most of the time we use it for LNC, where there is like 20, 30 candidates for, like, say, the bylaws committee. The ballots do cost us something. But I want to go to the Opa Vote console here for a second. As you could see, like the election of the bylaws alternates, that ballot cost us $10 because there was a lot of selections. But I want to go here and pretend like we're creating an election. And I want to show you some of the very cool options here, which you might want to use for OPA vote. I always want to enable expert mode. And the reason I do that, because you can choose whether or not to show the results during voting. I always think that's a bad idea because, when you're voting on something on an LNC list, you get to see the votes while you're going. But we always put no, not to show results while voting, because you can't easily change your vote in OPA vote, where you can if you're voting in an email thread. You can have anonymous voting, which is by default yes, but we do not vote anonymously on the LNC, so it's no. And then you put your candidates, but this is what I really wanted to show you. These are all the options you can use in OPA vote. So you have single winner, multi-winner, because that will change. Like if you hit multi-winner, one second here, like go here, recommended voting methods. It will tell you all the different choices, but let's go here. So you have instant runoff. Then you have different varieties of RCV. We just go for standard instant runoff. There are some different rules for tie breaking. To me, the simplest is just RCV. But if you ever want to experiment, so you can also do approval voting, but you can also do these really obscure things like some Condorcet type voting, board account, Buckland system, Coombs method, and various types of Condorcet. Now, if you go here, it'll tell you what all of these mean. But what's also super cool about OPA vote, I don't like it opens a new window, is, if you go back, here where it says create count, say you've done paper ballots, you can go and input them in here and it will do the counting for you. Like here with the tie breaking, you can have random, backward, and forward. Those are what the different varieties of RCV is. We always use random, which is just basic instant runoff voting. But backward tie breaking and forward tie breaking has to do with the number of first place choices that the tied selections originally had. It gets really complicated. I like things simple. I keep it at random. But if you're really interested in exploring the backward tie breaking, the forward tie breaking, you can look into that. I don't ever do that. But if you have a bunch of ballots that you have done that you just want OPA vote to do the counting for you, it also has that. Election Buddy does have a lot of the same options from what I understand. I'm just used to OPA vote. I've never used Election Buddy. They did use that at the 2020 National Convention for our electronic voting. So I know it has a lot of super cool options as well. I'm just not familiar with it. So I'm not promoting OPA vote over Election Buddy. It's just the one I'm familiar with and that I have an account with. All right. So let's go back to this main screen. So I did learn something today, that it is majority, meaning literally 50%. And I think that tie breaking backward forward will make a big difference if you ended up with a tie at the end. Since it's not more than 50%, it's literally 50%. So if you had an even number of voters, and like say we had an even number of voters and both Florida and New Mexico were tied, that whole tie-breaking thing could make a huge difference on whether you chose forward or backward tie-breaking. We always use random tie-breaking. But, and this fell off as it has, at least I hope you can see how this did reach a consensus location. And it did reach to where one of them got more votes than the others, with it being narrowed down just to their choices. But something which is interesting here, in which if there were a tie, in certain of those tie-breaking methods, I think Florida may have beaten out, but it wasn't a tie. Because what's interesting here is, this is why I numbered them, maybe not, because you can see that Florida was the first place choice of 4 people, then was the third choice of 2, and was the second choice of 1. New Mexico was the first place choice of 4 people, the second place choice. It's very, very evenly split. The second place choice of 1 and the third place choice of 3. So the difference between them is very, very slight. But the consensus candidate ended up being New Mexico, but with Florida, a very, very tight race. Very, very tight race. Now, with the elimination that ended up making a difference, which ended up being Joshua, Dave, and Dustin Blankenship's votes, Joshua only ended up being the last one on here just because I happened to put them up in that order. But his 4th place choice was Colorado. So he wouldn't have made a win. So he wasn't almost a win for Florida. His choice after that was Rhode Island, which was eliminated. His last place choice was Florida. Let's see about Dave Benner. Dave Benner's 4th place choice was Florida. Dustin Blankenship, he had Georgia next, Rhode Island next, Alabama next. His last place choice was Florida. And so I think you're starting to see that quite a few people there had Florida last. Now let's see what these last ones here for Florida, where they had New Mexico. Linnea had New Mexico immediately after Florida. Angela had New Mexico, not last, but 5th. And Dustin Nan, I believe, was the only one who had New Mexico last. Let's see, did Rich Bowen have New Mexico last? So I'm just pulling these down. I think only Dustin Nana ranked New Mexico last. No, who's this? Andrew Watkins did as well, but he didn't rank 5 and 6. It was his last choice at 4, so I don't really think that's a last choice. So at least now you can see how that worked and how New Mexico beat out Florida. But it was super, super close. A few people just changing their mind slightly different and had slightly different eliminations. I am still not too sure. It'd be interesting to run it with that tiebreaker with a different elimination. I don't think Florida would have won anyway. If instead, when was that tiebreaker? It was between Rhode Island and there was the 2 states that had the 2. Out of those, I don't think Florida was the next choice of any of those if it was done differently. Florida and New Mexico were neck and neck for 2 rounds, so I don't think there was any scenario, even if that random tiebreaker went a different way, that Florida would have won. I think this was destined to be New Mexico, though it did take 5 rounds. And as I said, New Mexico would have won if it was a plurality race. But the question always comes, if it was approval voting, who would have won? We can't know that. I could tell you if it were approval voting, I would have only cast one vote, and that would have been for New Mexico, because I would have gamed it. Because with approval voting, and when you only have a limited number of choices, you end up causing your favorite sometimes to lose by playing the way you're supposed to. I'm not going to say by the rules of the game, because there's nothing wrong with just choosing one. But if you go, you know what, I really want New Mexico, but I could live with X. So you pick them both. Sometimes you'll find that X, the one you really didn't want but could live with, won by one vote, which if you hadn't done, your first place would have gotten. It's called bullet voting, and that's part of the problem with small pools of a small voting pool with approval voting. It gets harder to do that the more people you get, but with smaller bodies like the LNC, bullet voting is what a lot of people do. For instance, when we use approval voting for a committee and a candidate I really, really want to be on that committee, I know voting for other candidates that I'm okay with on the committee can cause the candidate I really want to be on the committee to lose. So there's a lot of tactical voting and small voting groups with approval voting. Now, Dave Davis says the problem with ranked choice is under two parties, one of the major two-party candidates win. But under ranked choice, you're not going to only have two parties, at least not inevitably. First past the post, you inevitably have two parties. That's what it's set up for. So for a while, yeah, one of the two major party candidates would win because that's what people are used to. But over time, no, I don't believe that's the case. But that's like saying, you know, if I eat healthier, I'm going to die anyway. Yeah, but you're going to live longer. You know, right now, for sure, one of the two major party candidates are going to win. So all that comment proves is we won't be any worse off under ranked choice. It's inevitable under first past the post that nearly every single time that one of the two major party candidates are going to win. While under ranked choice, at least you have a chance. And the thing I truly like about ranked choice isn't even necessarily the potential to win. It's the data that comes out of it. Because when I go in Colorado and I ask people to register Libertarian, and they are right now registered as an independent, they would go, why? Why should I change my voter registration from independent to Libertarian? And I would say, well, you know, registering independent does send a message. It sends a message that you're unhappy with the major two parties, but it doesn't say how you're unhappy. For all anyone knows, statistically, you might want more communism. You might think the Democrats aren't left enough, and that's why you're an independent. When you register with a third party, you're under no obligation to vote for their candidates, but you let the statisticians know and the duopoly know how you disagree with them. So, in ranked choice, while the Libertarian candidate may not win, you really can gauge how much actual support you have, because people are comfortable voting for you as their first choice, particularly when they know you are not going to win, because they know their second choice will be counted. And we will start to have much more data on how people actually feel, rather than them holding their nose and voting for one of the two because they are concerned about the spoiler effect. Now, I'm not going to say that ranked choice voting is perfect or is the panacea for all of our problems. I don't think it is. Is there a system that might be better? As I saw, people advocating star. Here's what I'll say about other systems other than ranked choice. Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The groundwork has already been put in place for ranked choice. It's already been declared constitutional. It's already passed the court battles. There's already infrastructure in place to get this in place. To go, well, I don't want ranked choice because I like star better. Have you done the work to get star in place anywhere? Are there major star organizations working to change this anywhere? There isn't, but there is for RCV. So take the opportunity that we have before us, because it isn't a choice right now between star, RCV, and first past the post. It's a choice in most instances, though approval is on the map in some places. In most areas, it's a choice between ranked choice and first past the post. It's not a choice between that and all of these other scenarios you can come up with. What I like about ranked choice also, at least in single winner races, is that you can reproduce it by hand. And you can reproduce it by hand in a way that people can understand. Some of these other, which some may say are more accurate voting systems, absolutely require a computer and cannot be reproduced by hand in a way that the average person can understand. If in today's suspicious environment, RCV, any system, no matter how great it is, that can't be reproduced manually in a way that the common person can understand will not be trusted. Doesn't matter how good it is, they will not trust it. That is part of the problem with proportional representation and STV. Because in that case, the percentage you need to win are these weird fractions, and you don't transfer over entire votes. You can. That's not exactly how it's supposed to work. You transfer over fractions of votes. So it gets super complicated. STV can be super complicated, and people are already going to have a trust in RCV in a single winner race before I think they're going to trust it in multi-winner races. But that's the way to get to proportional representation. It gets much more difficult to reproduce by hand. Because of that, right now in multi-winner races, and in those particular races, I'm more a fan of approval voting when there's multi-winner races, because it's easily reproduced by hand and it's more difficult to game in a large voting population. It's a lot easier to game on small voting populations like the LNC, which is why I'm not a huge fan of approval voting on the LNC. But for multi-winner races and large voting populations, I do like it because you can reproduce it by hand in a multi-winner race. Where I think the superior system is STV. Again, I'm going with not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think STV right now in the political climate we have will be viewed with suspicion. So now to talk about the poison pill. The duopoly realizes that the first past the post system is a way to ensure their cartel. So they are scared of RCV. So they have been, there's a huge push to pair RCV with jungle primaries. Now, I am using that word very, very loosely, kind of the way Joe Scarborough did with RCV. I know there are different kinds of jungle primaries, but the ones you might be most familiar with is the top X system. Top 2, top 3, top 4, top 5. Those paired with RCV suck. They are the poison pill, and then people end up blaming RCV when the real fault was the top X system. And what the top X system is, it's a form of primary where everybody is thrown into one bucket. So you don't have a Republican primary and a Democrat primary and in some cases a Libertarian primary. You just have one primary. And out of that primary, the top whatever, the top 2, the top 4, the top 5, those are the ones that progress to the general election, no matter what party they're from. So in a top 2 system, in a deep blue or deep red state, in your general election, you could have 2 Republicans running and no Democrat, no Libertarian, no nothing, because it's top 2. And in a very a state that's very heavy toward one side or the other, it's going to be 2 Democrats or it's going to be 2 Republicans. And when you pair that also, say you have a top 5 system like Alaska does. So you have 5 people that come out of the primary, and then in the general, they had RCV. Well, I'm not going to be using actual examples here, but let's say in your top 5, you had 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. All of the Republicans are going to be ranking all of the Republicans 1, 2, 3. It's not really separate and distinct choices. It's just like slight variations within a flavor. RCV cannot be paired with stacking the deck the way a top X, I say top X because that number can vary. I think the ones that are in play right now are top 2, top 4, and top 5. I think Alaska is top 4. Can't keep forgetting whether it's top 4 or top 5. I absolutely am opposed to top 2, top 4, top 5. I cannot stand jungle primaries at all, because basically what you're having is 2 elections and 2 general elections, because it's not specific to a party. And the primary, less people show up to. Now, some people will say, well, that can benefit Libertarians, because if you can motivate Libertarians to come out in a very sparsely attended, primary, then you have more of a chance of them proceeding to the general ballot. But why do you even have to have a chance of them proceeding to the general ballot, where if we just had fair ballot access laws, they would be on the general ballot to begin with, and you wouldn't have to play those games with trying to manipulate a sparsely attended primary. But a lot of people are complaining about Alaska right now and blaming it on RCV. It's not RCV's fault. It's top 4. And those 2 were paired together. And it is such death to RCV that even though I'm a huge fan of RCV, if it's ever in Colorado paired with top X, I will vote it down. I will vote it down, because what I think the plan is to try to poison pill any of these alternative voting systems, be it approval, be it RCV, be it STAR, whatever it is, to have them fail in order to entrench first past the post, so that people can say, look, it didn't work. Well, that's almost like what's going on in the LP, like with all these people that are purposely sabotaging the party and then going, how could the Mises Caucus do this? So you have organizations that are, in my view, though not everyone's intention is that. There are people of goodwill that actually think this is for the good, but I do believe there are people who know damn well, and the absolute intention and why money from the major parties goes into this is to put a poison bill into RCV and they go, how could RCV do this? Now, Nathan, a lot of times where you have jungle primaries, where you can nominate multiple candidates from the same party, is even though they are running under a party label, it's a state in which where there isn't partisan registration. This isn't always the case, but like there's top 2 in Washington, and anybody could run, like the way the Washington ballot says, it will say like the Libertarian candidate, but doesn't even say Libertarian. It says prefers Libertarian, prefers Republican, prefers Democrat. If you're from a state that has partisan registration, it could be real difficult to envision. I've always lived in states with partisan registration, but there's about 16 or 17, I can't remember the exact number, states in the country that do not have partisan registration. So that's another factor as well. But we need voting reform. Right now, I'm convinced, because most of our races are single winner, that RCV is in fact the way to do it. But if some other contender comes along that starts to gain popular acceptance, I'd be fine with that. But one thing I'm not interested in is debating the finer points of ones that aren't even on the table. Because if it's not on the table, it's just pie in the sky, and it's not happening. And if the people who are these real big fans of range voting, star voting, whatever the other ones are, aren't out there getting it on the ballot, I'm going to work for the things that are actually before the people right now. And RCV is. It's not perfect. It absolutely is not perfect. But each time I've seen it on the LNC, it's come up with a very good consensus candidate. And this particular election, it happened to come up with the one that I ranked number 1. So you might go, well, no wonder you like it. You love this result. I'll remind you that I said it came up and worked exactly as it was supposed to in Whitney's election as well. And I ranked her last. And I was not happy with that election, but I still thought RCV worked beautifully and as it should, and that it did come up with the accurate will of that body. I just happened to be the odd duck out in that body. That's not the fault of RCV. That was just the realities of that voting body. So I'm a fan whether or not it produces the results I like. So when people come and say to me, well, you know, third parties probably aren't going to win under RCV either. I am not a fan of RCV because I think it will automatically give third parties a win. I am a fan of RCV because it's better than what we have now and will at least give third parties a chance. Even if no third parties ever won any more often under RCV than under first past the post, I would still be a fan and proponent of RCV. Because you shouldn't have to not vote for the candidate you really want to because you're scared of throwing the election to somebody else. You shouldn't have to vote with that fear. We should be able to know who accurately is people's first place candidate. You should always be able to do that, and you can't do that today. Even if it never scored the Libertarian Party one win, I would still be a fan of RCV voting because of that. And just something else, I've done a show on this before, I'm only going to explain it briefly. The whole wasted vote thing is actually a much bigger problem in first past the post. Everyone talks about the wasted vote syndrome. You vote for the Libertarian, it's a wasted vote. There's far more wasted votes, not in every election. Particularly this election season, we had some really, really tight elections. But in, say, the general election for president, there are millions of wasted votes because any vote more than the number needed in order to gain the electoral college vote in your state is a wasted vote. You could have stayed home and it wouldn't have made a difference. You could have voted for a third party candidate and it would not make a difference. Any number of votes past that number is in fact a wasted vote. There are millions of wasted votes every single presidential election if you're going to go with that mindset. Somebody asked if RCV would get rid of the Electoral College. No. It's just a different way of tabulating who is the winner in your state. That is then who the Electoral College votes would go towards. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Electoral College. Now, I do agree with you, Nathan. The only wasted vote is one that's, against your conscience. But if we're going to just go by sheer numbers, in California, the Electoral College votes are going to go to the Democrat. At least that's the reality of the state now. So that means that every single Republican wasted their vote because it doesn't count. It all comes down to the Electoral College vote. They might as well have voted for a third-party candidate. So RCV eliminates that. Anyway, that's it for this evening. This is a much longer show than I had wanted, but it is something I enjoy doing, and I did learn something, that it's not the parliamentary majority, you have to at least get 50% majority, and that is where the tie breaking really becomes very, very important, though. And in an LNC vote, I've never seen that come to where in the last round there was a tie. That would be super, super interesting. So I am going to research this forward tie breaking and backward tie breaking and report back to you guys what the differences is between those, because now I am super intrigued onto that. Because I used to just think in my head that it was in earlier rounds, and I'm like, just make it random. But now that I've got it through my head that it can happen in the final round, now I am much more interested. So every time I do this, I learn something as well. Okay, guys, I hope you have an awesome night. I'm not so sure if there's going to be a show tomorrow. I have an awful lot to do, but if I do, it most likely will be a history show, because we are due up for that. Oh, but before we go, I want to tell you a funny story. But anyone, this has nothing now to do with voting systems. This is more personal, so if you want to take off, you can take off. Patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. But so I went today to the Castle Rock History Museum. And, some of the tour guides had come up and stuff. We were just wandering around by ourselves. And I started asking the question I had about that park that had captivated my attention, Heritage Park. And, the lady was able to give me a little information about it. And I go, oh, but I found out this and I found out that. And I found like that. And she's looking at me. She goes, wow, it's really cool the way you've dug into this. And it's just so, it's funny how, the fact that I'm into history comes out no matter what area that we're talking about. So we really had a good time with that tour guide going over some of the history of Castle Rock. And I think she really liked some of the things that I had found super interesting. So there's this restaurant right around the corner that's been here forever. And there's this weird door in the side of it that you could tell must have used to have steps down, because it's high up, it must have had steps down, and it's been sealed up for as long as I've been in Castle Rock. And every time we go there, I'm like, what's up with this door? So there was a picture of this restaurant. It was built in 1890. So there was this old picture of it at the museum, and I'm examining it, and I go, look, Wayne, there wasn't a main entrance back then. There was no door in the front. That little weird side door, that was the main door. So I was so into it. I was so into it. All right. I just thought you guys would find that funny with my fascination with history. So I hope you have an awesome night, and I'll catch you later. All right, bye-bye.
what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians, or choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business.